now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale, our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. The world's people have spoken. Their message is clear. Time is running out.
Hello and welcome to the Hard Questions. I'm Serwanjja. There are activists that have gone up in arms against the government of Uganda, and they are campaigning against the oil and gas project. There is strong resistance from environmentalists who have said that the project is going to cause more harm than good, including the crude oil pipeline that is supposed to transport the oil. The Ugandan government, which is of course represented by the National Environment Management Authority, is calm, and they said that they did all the environmental impact assessments and they approved them, and they say that all the issues that could come up will be mitigated with great technology, and that issues of environment are at the core of this project. Joining me to discuss today is the Executive Director of the National Environment Management Authority, Dr. Akankwasa Barirega. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Solomon.
In 2006, Uganda discovered its oil. And later on, in about, conversation started to have the oil come out of the grounds. Environmental impact assessments were done for the Tilenga, Kingfisher, and for the pipeline. And those were actually approved by NEMA, that the project is smooth to go. Fast forward, the final investments decision is signed. All the stakeholders are excited. And then boom, we have some activists, including Ugandan civil society organizations, that are up in arms and saying that environmental issues remain at the heart of this project. You are the boss of the National Environment Management Authority. From where you sit, are you sure that you did your due diligence and that the environmental impact assessment reports that you, as a body, approved have everything sorted?
This authority, working with the lead agencies for environment management in Uganda, did review the environment and social impact assessment for all oil projects. This is Kingfisher project, this is EACOP, the pipeline, as well as Tilenga, the Tilenga project. So adequate mitigation mechanisms were put in place, and we are sure that if we follow the environment and social impact management plans approved and put in place, all will be well.
How can you assure Ugandans that everything is going to be well when the major stakeholders are the ones that did the environmental impact assessments and not NEMA as an independent organ?
Best practice world over is that regulators do not conduct environment and social impact studies because they are regulators. What they do is to license practitioners. The practitioners are independent of the developers. So the law provides that the developer, not NEMA, the developer, conducts the environment and social impact assessment studies. But because the developers may not have capacity, they may not be scientists or engineers, that's why the regulators certify practitioners in different fields of assessment, be it engineering, be it ecology, be it water resources, hydrology, etc. They are specialists certified to conduct these studies. So what the developer does is only to hire them, and they undertake the study to document, analyze, and assess environment and social impacts, both positive and negative. And then they come up with an environment and social impact statement for that project, which then NEMA reviews. NEMA as a regulator reviews the study submitted by the developer to ascertain itself. Once NEMA has satisfied itself that the social issues, ecological issues have all been assessed very well and mitigation mechanisms have been adequately proposed, then NEMA makes a decision.
And you're basing that on a report that has been done by the developer?
By certified environmental practitioners
as hired
by the developer, certified by NEMA. They are licensed by NEMA. It is like the court. I can give you the example of the court. You know, advocates are all officers of court. But when you go to court, it is not the court that conducts the arguments. It is the lawyers on either side who do the arguments. These are hired by the parties. But the lawyers are considered officers of court. They help the judge to make a decision. So the practitioners, they are professionals who conduct the study in their respective fields of professionalism. So there is not politics or money. It is pure science. And even that science, we do quality control by assessing it. And if we are not satisfied, we reject. When we are satisfied, we approve. Now we reject when the impacts, the negative impacts outweigh the positive impacts. That's when rejection comes. Or we also reject when the environment in which the project is supposed to be undertaken is so fragile and the impacts cannot be mitigated. So strategic assessments were done to ascertain that oil and gas production and exploration can actually coexist with biodiversity conservation.
Let's look at Tilenga. About 400 wells will be drilled in Tilenga alone, and part of that project goes into Murchison Falls National Park. I had an opportunity of looking at the EIA that they submitted to NEMA, and that was actually approved by NEMA. And it spells out a number of issues that this project will create, and also speaks about the mitigation. And one of them is that because the project is going through a national park, it could have an impact on the fauna and flora of the national park, and therefore affect tourism in that area.
In environment and social impact assessment, we have what we call the mitigation hierarchy. We start with avoidance. Avoidance applies where you cannot mitigate. For example, if it was a breeding site for a wild animal, you cannot shift a breeding site. So that one you must avoid. Where you cannot avoid, you reduce the impact, you mitigate. The mitigation agreed upon is that the flow lines and the pipelines will be at least 1 meter below the riverbed. So the pipelines will be below the riverbed.
What happens if there is a spill?
If there is a spill, first of all, there are mechanisms to detect the spill. The pipelines are coated, meaning that they cannot corrode, they cannot rust. But the pipelines will also be fitted with sensors to monitor pressure. So if there is any change in pressure or change in temperature or leakage, it is detected immediately, it comes out. And because the pipeline is below the riverbed, there is no chance of contamination of the water body. So those are some of the mitigations, among very many others, including the technology for drilling. We have agreed on directional drilling, which has as little impact in terms of ecological footprint as you can have. You talked about several wells that are going to be established for Tilenga, for example. Only a handful of production wells will be in the park. All the rest of the wells and the central processing facility will all be outside the park. And that was arrived at through avoidance and reducing the ecological footprint of the project so that we can have a win-win situation, like wetlands, forest reserves, national parks, and even water crossing. There has been talk that you see it is crossing Lake Victoria. No, it is not crossing Lake Victoria, but certainly it is within the Lake Victoria basin. That's a fact. This is a linear project. A linear project means that it has to be straight in some way. You are not going to have it zigzagging. It won't work. It's a linear project. But adequate mechanisms have been put in place. For example, avoidance of Ramsar sites has been done to ensure that as much as possible it is not crossing fragile and sensitive ecosystems. Where it is impossible to avoid, adequate mitigation measures have been put in place.
You talked about the dust that could come out of drilling, and yet the report says that is insignificant. Well, they said they will leverage on technology not to really put up the dust to affect people. But, I mean, dust is a big issue.
Dust can be managed through watering, you know. So it's not that dust was, you know, ignored as not consequential, because it is consequential. It was assessed and due mitigation measures were prescribed to the operators.
And you are satisfied as NEMA?
Absolutely. And so far, so good.
Let's talk about emissions, greenhouse gases. The report cites it. And as NEMA, you said that can be handled, cannot stop the project.
We have put in place mechanisms for reducing greenhouse gases. For example, we agreed with the operators that there won't be flaring, heating, for example, and supply of energy in the production camps. We have agreed that they are going to use hydropower to reduce the emissions in terms of diesel generators and related things. So we've agreed on mechanisms to reduce the carbon footprint of the project.
Really?
Yeah, sure.
And you're 100% sure that it will not go beyond the levels that will shoot it to significant?
Not at all. You see, what makes hydrocarbons to emit carbon is use of the hydrocarbons. These projects are going to extract hydrocarbons. So it is the use, it is your use in your car, in your motorcycle, which actually pollutes the air. This is production. It is just getting out, processing, and selling or transporting. Of course, the process is not zero emissions. They are emissions, but they are not so significant.
Was, by the way, an EIA done for EACOP?
The EACOP did an environment and social impact assessment. It also did the resettlement action plan from where it starts up to where it ends in Tanzania. Tanzania also did a similar one, and we compared the notes. People are being compensated where the pipeline will pass, and all due measures have been considered and addressed, and we think that the project is safe to be implemented.
And the clock is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator.
Let's have the conversation at a bigger level. The world is moving away from fossil fuel. They're going into renewable energy. Uganda is just, you know, excited about its oil and gas project. Don't you think we need to think really green energy, clean energy, rather than focusing on fossil fuel in the country?
At COP26 in Scotland, the world agreed to phase out hydrocarbon as a form of energy, and the time limit was set by around 20 years, that in 20 years we should have significantly transitioned from hydrocarbons to greener energies. And I can tell you Uganda is actually ahead. You've heard about Chira Chira EV, Kayora bus. Uganda is already ahead in terms of transiting. We are already transiting from hydrocarbon powered engines to electric powered engines.
Dr. Akankwasa,
we even have electric powered motorcycles now, border borders, which you could have seen.
Dr. Akankwasa, you're putting 6.5 billion barrels of oil onto the international grid. The effect of that is immense.
It is true. The world has agreed, including Uganda, that we should transition from hydrocarbon to green energy. But I am also adding that Uganda was already ahead on that front. Most of our energy in Uganda, as you know, is hydropower. Hydropower is the biggest source of our clean energy. So we were already on the front of green energy even before the world started talking about it. But within these 20 years, grace period, the country will still need petroleum. The planes will still fly, as you know. The vehicles will still move on the road, isn't it? So as you transition, you will still need hydrocarbons, and that is Uganda's position. Meanwhile, the money we get from the hydrocarbons, we invest it to facilitate transition from hydrocarbons to green energy. Now, currently, 88% of our energy is biomass. This is charcoal, firewood, meaning that hydropower, actually we use hydrocarbons in less than 10% of our energy mix. Less than 10%. 88% is biomass. Now, the hydrocarbons are going to help us to transition from biomass, because biomass has a direct impact on the environment. It is the trees that are being cut to cook. Meaning that even the little emissions that we may have, insignificant as they are, we shall be destroying the environment that will absorb them. So hydrocarbons, we are looking at them to actually catalyze, to quicken our transition from bad energy to cleaner energy.
All right. Yeah. Interesting. Uganda was taken to the East African Court of Justice, and that case is going on. There is also growing global resistance to this project. And some of them are saying that Uganda did not do a good job, and Uganda should stop its project. What do you have to say about this?
The fears are unwarranted. Government, through NEMA and other lead agencies, did assess and evaluate perfectly well the environment and social impacts of this project. And had it been established that we cannot manage these impacts, or that the impacts outweighed the positives, we wouldn't have approved this project. In our view, those campaigns must be after achieving different objectives. Because, first of all, where are these campaigns being made? Or who is talking about these campaigns? Let's look at the global emissions per capita. You know, Africa continent as a whole contributes only 2% of global emissions. 2%. Yeah? If you look at carbon emissions per capita for Uganda, it is 0.1 metric tons of carbon per person per year. America per capita is 13%, actually towards 14%. Africa combined has a per capita emissions of 0.8 metric tons per person per year, 0.8, which is far below the global average. The global average is 3.9 metric tons per person per year. So clearly, you can see that anybody who can complain that Uganda is going to exacerbate the global problem, that would be an absolute lie. So it is not true that Uganda's oil exploration and production is going to tilt the world in terms of climate change. In fact, we are victims
Victims.
We are victims of climate change. We are victims of global warming. We are victims of global emissions, of the producers. You know the lead producers: China, European Union, United States, India. Those are the biggest producers. Africa combined 2%. So if Africa, the whole continent, is just 2% of the global emissions, why should somebody say that Uganda, which is at 0.1% of metric tons of carbon per capita, is going to change the world?
You know, oil and gas is a global commodity.
It is.
It's global conversations, not only Uganda.
Correct.
6.5 billion barrels.
That is insignificant if you compare to the global emissions, for example. It is insignificant. And if you look at the use of coal, for example, for powering Europe, for powering America, for powering India, it is multiples, million multiples of what you are talking about. So we are nowhere even 1% of the problem. But again, we are saying we are even not going to add this problem. We are saying we are going to get this money, use it to catapult our economy into a green path, green economic path. We already have green growth strategy, as you know. So the government, the country, has already agreed that we are following a green path to development. There is no doubt about it.
What would be Uganda's demands at COP27?
I think the demand for Africa, and indeed that for Uganda, has been climate justice. There must be climate justice. We must pursue collective but differentiated responsibility. Why? We contribute as a whole continent 2% of the problem. And so, shouldn't the people causing climate change pay for it? Shouldn't we have liability for loss and damage? Because why should you release emissions in the atmosphere which will cause floods here in Uganda? And you who has released the emissions and made money, why shouldn't the money made from the release of emissions be used to solve the problem? That's our argument. There must be collective meaning we all have a duty to address climate change because it affects all of us. If we release emissions because others are releasing, we shall endanger ourselves. That's why we are following a green path as a country. In spite of us having a right to development as well, we are saying no, it is morally wrong. Now we are here discussing climate change because it is a global crisis, I can tell you. It is a threat to human survival, I can tell you. And we take it very, very seriously. That's why we are bringing initiatives like 45 million or 40 million trees planted per year in Uganda. Each person, each citizen should have at least a tree grown in a year. We are going into transiting from hydropowered engines to electric-powered engines. We are going solar production so that we can have clean energy. We are doing all of this not to follow a bad example of developing at all costs. No, we want for a green path. So our demand to the world is that there must be climate justice. People must take responsibility for the damage they cause to the environment under a conventionally agreed and well-established principle of polluter pay principle.
You see, you'll find it very difficult to convince the world on that. Why? Because whilst you're calling for climate change justice, you're actually going to be adding 6.5 barrels of fossil fuel to the global market.
We can absorb them. We can absorb them.
You see, you're saying we need climate justice, but we can also contribute to the pollution.
No. We are saying we should take responsibility for our pollution. If it means us taking responsibility for the credits or tons of carbon that we shall release into the atmosphere, we are ready to do so.
How?
And that's what we are asking. Through carbon credit calculations. We can do calculations of credits, and if we are found to be in a deficit, we are ready to take responsibility. That's our argument.
Dr. Akankwasa, as we finish, what you've told us today is that the oil and gas project will go on because it got green lights from NEMA after being satisfied that all the environment-related issues and social issues are catered for. Am I right on that?
You are very right, and we have been building our capacity to manage oil and gas industry for quite a long time. We have put in place laws, policies, guidelines, and standards, and we've put in place adequate capacity, including a national oil spill contingency plan. So we are ready to regulate the sector. There is no sector that is impact-free. We are not saying oil and gas sector does not have negative environmental impact. That's not what we are saying. We are saying these impacts have been assessed, adequate mitigation measures put in place, adequate capacity to regulate the sector put in place, and we are ready to regulate the sector. That's what we are saying.
Okay, and at the same time you want justice.
We want climate justice at global scale.
Even including Uganda paying
Absolutely.
its carbon footprint.
In fact, we are discussing internally a mechanism where we can force our industries in Uganda to establish their own carbon sinks. If you are a factory emitting carbon dioxide and other gases that are deleterious to ozone layer or global climate, we should come to you, measure how many tons of carbon you release. We ask you to put in place a carbon sink, either tree plantation that can absorb your tons of carbon that you release, and the excess, if you cannot absorb them directly, you should be able to pay Solomon somewhere to plant trees so that he can absorb your excess emissions. That's what we call the net zero production. That's how far as a country we have moved. So we are far ahead of the world in terms of greening our economy.
Dr. Akankwasa, your conclusion?
My conclusion is that everyone who is talking about the oil and gas exploration and production in Uganda should come and we share this information. We have this information. Our website is full of information. We have additional information. It is not proper to speculate when we have science. We have scientific facts that are available. We don't need to speculate. But also we don't need to use oil and gas, you know, to score or settle our geopolitical or other political differences. No. We should stick to facts, science.
Dr. Akankwasa Barirega, thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you so much.
Well, I've been speaking to Dr. Akankwasa Barirega, who is the Executive Director of the National Environment Management Authority. This is The Hard Questions.